Hi, I'm Lisa Leiter. In Chicago Business Today, private bank struggles. Illinois is second only to Georgia in the number of bank failures since early last year. When the government auctions these failed banks, the institutions clamoring to take them over have mainly been large publicly traded banks. Smaller local lenders have essentially been left out of the bidding parties. And earlier I sat down with Crain senior reporter Steve Daniels to talk more about why. Steve, thanks for being here.
Sure.
So smaller privately held banks want to get in on the game of buying these failed banks, but they're really at a disadvantage compared to their publicly held counterparts. Why?
Well, the public equity markets have been more open to investing in publicly traded banks. Privately held banks have had less success. You know, one reason is very simple. If you buy shares of a publicly held bank, you can trade them the next day. If you invest in a privately held bank, that investment is locked up until there's some kind of an event, something to get you out of it, and that makes private equity firms shy away.
So that's really the main reason why private equity firms probably aren't chomping at the bit to get in and provide some capital to these privately held firms.
Well, they're interested. It's not that they're completely uninterested. It just might reduce the valuation that you as a privately held bank can sell your stock at. And maybe that's not a price that you want to sell at because it dilutes your own interest. There's sort of a bid-ask spread here, and it's wider than it is for the publicly traded guys. So the publicly traded guys are able to do more of these deals.
So which privately held banks maybe will get the capital to go forward?
Well, we wrote about American Chartered Bank, a relatively low-key or low-profile bank, but the largest privately held bank in town, based in Schaumburg, mainly a commercial lender, and they are raising capital through their existing shareholders, through clients, through referral sources. They're not going to private equity, at least right now, and they find a good solid pipeline of money in that way. Bob Reiter, is the CEO of that bank, has talked about having a pipeline of something like $19 to $30 million. This isn't fully committed, but people who are saying, yeah, that's we're interested. So they're emerging as potentially one of the ones that can do this kind of thing.
And any other names that strike you?
We also wrote about First Chicago Bank, which, not to be confused with the old First Chicago, which became Bank One and then later J.P. Morgan Chase. But a bunch of alums of the old First Chicago Bank bought into a couple of small local banks and renamed it First Chicago. They've really suffered from some loan quality issues. They're trying to raise an enormous amount of capital, $300 million, which is over and above what banks 10 times their size in this market have been raising in their public offerings. A lot of people are very skeptical that they'll be able to raise that amount of money, but they are going directly to private equity firms and saying, you know what, if you want to get in on the failed bank transactions, you're going to need to have a real bank trying to buy those things rather than trying to do these on your own.
Recently, you wrote another story saying we were about halfway through this banking failure crisis here in Illinois. Do you think that some of these smaller privately held lenders will be able to get in and buy some of these failed banks in this kind of the second half of this crisis?
I would imagine that it will be difficult in the second half of this. The appetite for these failed bank transactions is enormous, and there's from publicly traded, from big banks, from private equity. I don't see why it's going to be any easier in the second half of this wave of failures than it's been in the first.
Okay. Well, Steve, good story. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks.
And that's all for this edition of Chicago Business Today. You can read Steve's story in this week's print edition of Crain's or on chicagobusiness.com, where you can also find all of your breaking news. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.